Ambassador, just to challenge that perspective, of course, a more unilateral approach might pay short-term gains for India, but this is a country that cannot essentially isolate itself from the rest of the world. It has to do business with the United States, the Trump administration, and the world's largest economy. So as it stands right now, given the tariff threat that we see coming from this White House, what's your message to those US policymakers when it comes to doing business with India? And do you believe that India's red lines will have to shift here? Compromise will need to be found in order to get a deal done and to ensure that those 50% tariffs don't hit India's economy in the hardest way?
Well, I think at the moment, there are carve-outs. So, for instance, pharma and electronic products are outside tariffs. So those exports will continue. There are other products which may be outside tariffs, and those will continue. And we would continue our efforts to try to find a solution with the United States, which is reasonable, which also takes into account India's sensitivities. I think for a democracy like India, where there are many, interest groups at play, especially the agri sector, where there are 50% of our population still employed, I think we can't really allow that to hit turmoil, because these are subsistence farmers who eke out a livelihood with 2.5 acres. And if the shift from agriculture to industry has to take place, it will take place gradually. Unfortunately, it's not been happening as fast as it should, but that's the reality today. So I don't see any government being in a position to really compromise on agriculture or dairy across the board. But having said that, there are products that we buy from the United States. And in the agricultural sector, dried fruits, apricots, apples, and so on, and edible oils. So I'm sure that there is scope to purchase more. So as I said, a reasonable compromise perhaps would be workable, but the expectation of wholesale opening of India's agriculture and dairy sector, I don't think that is going to happen. And, when we see that the United States has not forced the EU to open its agri sector wholesale, and the EU still has restrictions on genetically modified products. And so also with Japan, I think the US, in its deal with Japan, has got Japan to open its rice market, which it imports in any case, it imports rice, but not the agriculture sector wholesale. So I would imagine that it should be possible not to single out India for a harsher, more differentiated approach, as we see also in the oil sector, where China is the largest importer, but there are no sanctions from Russia. Then the EU imported products worth $67 billion from Russia last year, more than India, including India's energy imports, but no sanctions on the EU. And the US is also importing strategically critical minerals from Russia, including uranium hexafluoride, palladium, chemicals, fertilizers, and so on, very minuscule amounts. But an American expert explained that there is a critical dependency of the US for import of these products, when there's a critical dependency of India for accessible and economical energy imports. So I think this is what really grates in India. You can't single out India for a harsher approach than you have adopted to all your other friends and partners. And therefore, we have to read the tea leaves, Is it really this issue, or is there a personal pique over something, or what? It's a bit of a puzzle to Indians why we are being singled out.
Well, Ambassador, expand on that for me, because the criticism on the American side is that India has been purchasing this Russian oil and funding Russia's war machine. Now, I've spoken with India's petroleum minister in the last few months. He made a spirited defense of India's buying. At the same time, we've also just heard from Meera Shankar in the last 24 hours. He has also said that it is in the national and the global interest for those Russian oil flows to continue. Do you think India is being treated unfairly here? And if so, what is the pathway forward on those Russian oil purchases? Is it time to cut the losses here, step back from buying that Russian oil and find alternatives? Or would you advocate for the government to continue making those controversial purchases?
Well, I don't want to double guess what the government is going to do. But I think at the moment, there is no plan to halt purchases. But talks with the US are continuing. US talks with Russia have started, and the US is talking about investments in Russia, about trade with Russia, about oil investments, about investments in critical minerals. So it does appear to us to be a little precious to put pressure on India at a time when you are talking about opening up, when Europe still has carve-outs for Hungary, Slovenia, and some other countries to import Russian energy. And total European imports from Russia last year, in 2024 is what I'm talking about, was still more than imports that India had from Russia. So is Europe funding Russia's war machine? Is China funding Russia's war machine? Because they bought $10 billion worth of imports, energy imports, more than India did last year. And even if India were to stop and these purchases were to continue, do you think Russia would be financially squeezed? Of course, it would hit our relationship with Russia, which is important, which has been a steady partnership over many years, but economically very thin. Till we started energy imports. At the moment, it's unbalanced because, we import a large amount of energy from India. Russia imports very little from Russia, and Russia imports very little from India. So there are issues in that relationship, but it's been a steady partnership, and they've been a good strategic partner. And there are legacy issues in the defense sector. So nobody in India is going to say, because the US is pressurizing us, we're going to put our relationship with Russia at stake also.
Ambassador, just before I let you go, you heard earlier that Trump has named Sergio Gore as the new ambassador for India. Do you think he's the right person for the job?
Well, I don't really know him. I've read about him. He's really not been a diplomat before, but he has President Trump's ear. I think what has struck people in India is a bit strange that he'll also be special envoy to Central Asia and South Asia. So is President Trump looking at India through the prism of somehow weaning away Central Asian oil from its direction towards Russia and China, and trying to get an outlet through Pakistan, which was the old game in Afghanistan? Are we going to see a replay of that? I think there are questions which India has, and I think these also will need to be answered as we go along if the hiatus in the relationship right now is to be resolved by both countries.